morning. Thank you for joining us for what I hope will be an engaging and important conversation on a critical topic, the growing inequities and social fragmentation in the U.S. that are contributing to youth isolation and alienation as reflected in the 4.6 million youth who are disconnected from school and work.
On the plus side, as we know, both in the US and around the globe, there are amazing, incredible, locally driven solutions that are existing. A lot of those are sort of rooted in comprehensive and holistic approaches that nurture both individual and societal healing. But as is true in most fields, good ideas and proven approaches often stay siloed in narrow geographic or sector-specific silos. Even when a good idea is shared, it's often difficult to secure funding to test a new idea in a new location or in a different country. We asked a question at IYF, what if we could shatter some of those silos and to create mechanisms that facilitate not only the transfer and exchange of knowledge and ideas, but also facilitated improved practice and policies benefiting young people. 3 years ago, International Youth Foundation launched the Reconnecting Youth Initiative. We wanted to learn from global solutions for addressing the needs of out of school and out of work young people to see what was out there. Ultimately, our goal was to strengthen services that foster the development of young people in the US so that they are work ready, resilient, and civic minded. Our efforts focused on forming cross-border learning partnerships in Baltimore, New Orleans, and Nebraska. And today we want to explore the value of cross-border learning and more specifically, how we can strengthen outcomes and increase efficiencies in service delivery and information exchange. I'm so pleased to have an incredible dynamic group of panelists joining me in the office here in Baltimore and also virtually online. And we are so thrilled to have Nelson Fernandez, who's going to be our moderator for today. Nelson comes from New York City. He is the former chairman of APCO Worldwide and now is leading his own consulting company and has been so generous to contribute his time and expertise with us today. And so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to him.
Thank you very much. I am delighted to be here. Good morning to everyone here in Baltimore and also everybody who is joining us virtually. I'm going to introduce our distinguished panelists. I'm very excited to hear about the great work that they've been doing and then take you briefly through the run-up show and then we'll start. So here in Baltimore, we have Gina Baez, who is Health Program Administrator for the Baltimore City Health Department. Welcome, Gina.
Good morning, thank you.
We have Carrie Owens to my right, who is Program Manager for Baltimore City Mayor's Office of Employment Development.
Morning.
Good morning. And on the phone from Nebraska, we have Sarah Riffle. Sarah is Associate Vice President, Connected Youth Initiative, Nebraska Children and Families Foundation. Good morning, Sarah. And we also are being joined by Bryce White, who is Director of YEP Works Youth Empowerment Project in New Orleans. Good morning to you all.
Good morning.
Good morning. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to start first by listening directly to all of you about the nature of the work that you're doing. And I'm going to have a couple of questions about that, specifically how it relates to the cross-border learning experience and thinking adaptation that you have all been involved with. Then we're going to talk a little bit more, get more in depth and talk about lessons from the field. Then we're going to talk about specific questions about the value of cross-border learning as you perceive it, with the goal of really both presenting challenges and insights, given your experience working with your individual programs. Then we're going to open it up to the audience, and we're going to do our best to tackle any questions that come up over the course of the session. I'll conclude with some final comments, turn it back over to Shannon, and we'll call it a session, okay? So without further ado, I'd like for each of the panelists to describe the work that you are currently doing in applying lessons learned from cross-border learning partnerships and practices. And I'd like for you to just describe the nature of your work in Baltimore, then in Nebraska and New Orleans. So Gina?
Yes, good morning. I've been working for the Baltimore City Health Department since 2002, and the bulk of my work has been working with Latino youth. Baltimore has seen an increase in immigrants especially from countries such as El Salvador, Honduras, Mexico, and others as well. But these three countries are the bulk of the youth that we've been working with for the past 16, 17 years. So the first few years were more about teen pregnancy prevention. So we saw lots of youth, hundreds of youth went through our programs. The health department hosted the programs. It was a comprehensive model called the Carrera model. So we were able to really learn. For me, it has been a learning experience already, a cross-cultural learning experience, because I learned from each one of them what their cultures were, what moves them, what motivates them, what their challenges are. So for me, yes, the program offers certain supports for them, but I learned as much from them, if not more. Now my job is also supporting the after school program, which still exists under Casa de Maryland, but also the teen pregnancy, actually the family planning clinic that not only sees teenagers, but sees all ages, women in reproductive age. And so we still see a lot of immigrant populations. Definitely the Latino population has increased, and it's continuously increasing here in Baltimore, but also we're starting to see other populations. We are starting to see more African immigrants, Middle Eastern immigrants, really from all corners of the world. Baltimore has always been a hub for immigrants, and in this case, lately we have important refugee populations, significant in numbers. So we still see a lot of the Latinas, but also women from all over the place. Our clinic is about 85% immigrant clients. So we definitely keep learning from all of them. Their situations, their challenges are just increasing right now. And we are committed to supporting the youth as well as the women in reproductive age that come to our clinics or to our programs.
Great, thank you very much, Gina. Kerry?
Hi, I work for the Mayor's Office of Employment Development, and I'm the program manager for Youth Opportunity. We serve roughly 900 young people a year. All of the young people are opportunity youth, meaning that they're 18 to 24. They're not in school, not in work, not in training. Our agency is the workforce development arm for Baltimore City. One of the things that initially drew my attention to the opportunity to visit Tijuana, we were hosted by ProSalute. We
Describe ProSalute just briefly.
ProSalute is an organization in Mexico that actually they have a health clinic, but the aspect that we were looking at was the Orale model, which is a peer-to-peer type model. And for us, I saw a perfect fit because we're always talking about placement and retention. The better you prepare young people up front, the better off the results will be. When their model includes life skills, job readiness, and reproductive health. When you take all three of those things together and you can put them in a curriculum that offers young people real information, and on top of that, it's conducted by a peer. Young people are more likely to be receptive to information. They're going to be more open in discussion. The important piece of that is, and was, the training that was offered. ProSalute sent some folks up here, and we did a week's worth of training not with just the peers that we wanted to, conduct the workshops, but with my entire staff. So everybody could be on the same page.
That's interesting. Sarah? Sarah?
Yes.
Would you like to talk a little bit about, describe the work that you're currently doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So Nebraska Children and Families Foundation was introduced to DUNCEL, and DUNCEL is a civil society organization located in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And DUNCEL's aim is really to prepare youth in care, they call them care leavers, using a holistic approach for the transition to independent living so that those young people are able to develop as active citizens in their country. And when we were introduced to DUNCEL, we determined rather quickly that DUNCEL's approach to making sure that young people are equipped for self-sufficiency was very similar to our Connected Youth Initiative model in Nebraska. Nebraska's Connected Youth Initiative works in partnership with local communities, state systems partners, national partners, and then a variety of funders to improve outcomes and opportunities for unconnected older youth. We serve about 2,500 youth annually, and what it means to be an unconnected youth in Nebraska is that that includes those young people with foster care experience, those that might be involved in the juvenile justice system, at risk or experiencing homelessness or trafficking, and then also lack the family support. And so our goal really is helping those unconnected youth to thrive as members of their community. So as you can see, very similar to the mission of DUNCEL. Both of our organizations have a goal to integrate youth voice and engage young people in program design, policy, advocacy, and leadership. And this common sort of philosophy was the basis of our learning objectives for the Reconnecting Youth Project. The focus of the exchange was to explore different innovative approaches for supporting youth transitioning from care and how youth voice might be more meaningful and intentionally integrated into the work. A little bit about the exchange. In May 2018, a group from Nebraska Children and Families Foundation traveled to Buenos Aires, and we were really excited because we had the opportunity to bring 2 young adults from Nebraska to travel with us. And then we also included 2 national partners in our exchange from Jim Casey Youth Opportunities Initiative and then Think of Us. And so we had a really robust group of folks that spent 5 days in Buenos Aires with the amazing staff from DUNCEL. And then just a few weeks later, the folks from DUNCEL were able to travel to Nebraska for another 5 days to continue the learning exchange. And then another highlight from our particular exchange was during the time in Nebraska, thanks to IYF, we were able to host a cross-border learning luncheon where practitioners and funders and partners and young people from Nebraska, and then as well as our friends from DUNCEL, could all come together and really share, our experiences and what we've learned. But as a result of our project, I know we'll dive into it a little bit in more detail, but we've really been able to strengthen our youth engagement strategies in Nebraska, taking what we've learned from DUNCEL.
Thank you, Sarah. And I could already see one theme emerging, which is, some of you have already talked about this, which is the integration of youth voice in the kind of work that you're doing. And I think we're going to see, as we talk in more detail about your cross-border learning application, this is clearly one theme that resonates. Okay, New Orleans, Bryce, would you like to describe the work that you've been doing?
Yes, good morning, thank you.
Good morning.
My program at Youth Empowerment Project is called Yep Works. It's our job training program. And we have partnered with Rede Cidadã out of Brazil, based in Belo Horizonte, Brazil, but also really across the entire country. It's a much larger project. But Youth Empowerment Project, We run 3 youth-run businesses in New Orleans. We run a bike shop, a thrift store, and a graphic design program. And we have a version of a sort of fairly traditional job training program. So we have a soft skills and a hard skills curriculum. We support youth, and we basically try to get them connected to employment. We primarily serve opportunity youth, 16 to 24 years old. Youth Empowerment Project as a whole has a number of other aspects as well. We have an education program, mentoring, enrichment, things like that. So one thing that's been exciting about this program is we've looked at Hege Sedada's job training curriculum, which is based around something called biocentric education. And this was new to us, and we can spend some time on it if to be specific, but it's a program that involves sort of the whole self and really creates an opportunity for young people to adapt and deal with some of the internal traumas and struggles that they're dealing with in the context of a job training program and in the context of employability. And it's been a unique opportunity for us to look at that. And I will say, we started this process about 2 years ago, that there was, I wouldn't say, you could say skepticism. There was definitely some, the learning process has taken some time, and I think that's created a depth that is really exciting that I'd be interested to discuss as this conversation moves forward. And as you point out, Nelson, we've really moved towards using this model and adapting it based on the responses from our youth. So the young people involved in this programming, and now we've had an opportunity to bring a group of young staff, some program graduates, and senior staff to Brazil to experience this training. And then we're able to, thanks to this learning exchange, bring a team from Brazil to New Orleans several times to lead these opportunities with our young people in our space. And that really, conceptually, we liked it, we experienced it, we thought it was great, but we really weren't sure how it was going to be able to be implemented, and to be able to have our young people say, this is actually meaningful to us, and this is useful, and this is something we'd like to continue, really made the difference for us. So just briefly, we've actually now launched a version of this curriculum in January with our young people. And so this is our first test run. We're right in the middle of it right now. And it's very exciting. And so I can talk more about that as we go on, but I'll be excited to report today and then in the future about how that exchange is going. So it's a really exciting moment for us to sort of take this to the next level, basically.
Yeah, Bryce, thank you. That's really exciting. And what is also interesting, and again, it's another powerful theme, I think, that this component of biocentric education, where you are looking holistically at the individual, even as you also focus on the hardcore skills that they need to integrate, is another emerging theme that I think some of you have already started to really experience in the work that you're doing. That's great. Those are great descriptions. Thank you. So let's talk a little bit and think more specifically about cross-border learning and the experience that you've had with it. I'm interested because I think a lot of the people who are dialing in, who are committed to the field, want to understand what the benefits are of cross-border learning and how it really has impacted the way you even approach local program delivery and implementation. So anybody can jump in. If you can start to unpack that a little bit for me.
I think it has a lot of value. For myself, when we traveled there, you saw the young people who aren't very different from the young people in Baltimore. They had the same wants, needs, and some of the same challenges that our young people had. In Baltimore, as far as I'm concerned, if you aren't evolving, you're not moving along. The idea that someone has a curriculum that addresses some of the hardcore needs and challenges that we have was, that was great. You know, I look at our job as trying to help young people's lives slow down. Because instead of having emergency after emergency after emergency, when you can provide them with solid information up front that they learn from a peer, their lives will start to slow down and they'll have less time between these emergencies. You know, so I really felt, and the other thing that got me is the staff in Mexico.
What about the staff?
They were extremely dedicated. They were all peers, which is a little different from us. But what I did see was the same dedication, enthusiasm that our staff has working with the young people that they serve. And that interaction between staff and youth, that's what makes the difference.
Right. Interesting. Anybody else want to jump in and tackle this question?
Baltimore, you know, here in Baltimore, it has always been a land of immigrants. You know, different populations have arrived here, have established themselves in this area. And I think that we have to adapt with the times. Whatever populations are coming, we have to provide services that are relevant to them, that are going to help them integrate and become acculturated to this area, to this country. You know, so I know that in our case, our after-school programs and youth serving programs have been about helping youth figure out the differences. So as we are learning from them and their countries and what they experience over there, we have to serve as a bridge. I would call it a bridge in between cultures, helping them figure out the systems here, from the school system, which is very, very different, healthcare system, employment system, anything. You know, the laws here are very different. You know, over there, for example, it might be okay for an employer to say, wanted, we're looking for a 20 to 25-year-old good-looking female for our front desk, or, you know, something to that effect, where they have to understand here we're in a different situation. There's different laws, there's different things that apply. So when these youth are here getting adapted to this new culture, to this new job environment, they need to know how things work here. So as they learn, we learn with them as well.
Yeah, Gina, that's great. And I know that you've been particularly interested in looking at adaptation and how to adapt culturally relevant programmatic components, curriculum, et cetera, in ways that really improve program delivery and outcomes. Talk a little bit about the art of adaptation. What has your current experience taught you? For anybody interested in the field who is challenged by this idea of adaptation, what needs to be kept in mind? What's worked for you, and what are some of the challenges?
Yes, when we started this after-school programs and youth serving programs, our curriculum that we used obviously was thought for the population here in the US. So we always had to adapt some things. And of course, we have constraints, fidelity constraints sometimes if the curriculum is, you know, evidence-based, and we have to carry it out in a certain way. So for a long time, we've been looking for a curriculum that is going to adapt a little better to the needs of our population. And that's why we are so excited about partnering with the International Youth Foundation and Pro Salud, and the Orale curriculum was a very welcome, you know, when I found out about it, I was very excited because I didn't have to translate anymore. I didn't have to adapt it to the cultural needs of the population that we serve here in Baltimore. This is probably something that we can just apply, just like if we're in Mexico, because the youth that we serve here are from Mexico, from El Salvador, from Honduras, Guatemala, and places that are culturally similar. So we haven't implemented the oral curriculum yet, but we are very excited to do so in the near future.
And implicit in your question, and then I want to get to the folks who have actually partnered on some of this work. Implicit in your question is this notion of, as you think about adaptation, technical assistance. You need some assistance in sort of understanding, I think, how to do it right, how to approach it, the pitfalls, avoiding the pitfalls. Can you talk a little bit about the needs as you see them for people who are interested in adapting?
Yes, I would say try to educate yourself as much as possible in the different cultures that you are serving. What has helped us a lot is to hire staff that are going to be bicultural, that know about this culture, that have been, or that know the language. That always helps. Also, just cross-cultural training, cultural competency training is something that we do in the health department every year. I think it's very important for folks that have probably never traveled or never met too many people from other cultures. I think it's important to start integrating these trainings into our programs and for all staff, not just for the staff that are going to be delivering the curriculum, but also for the staff or for the administration as well, because that's going to educate, that's going to inform their decisions, right, and how to implement. So as much as we can learn from these other cultures, the better, the more the better.
Understood. Thank you very much. And then for Sarah and Bryce, I guess, one question that I know many people are probably trying to kick around is, we talk about the value of these partnerships, but obviously whenever you engage with partners, especially partners who are outside of the US, who are operating in a different cultural context, there are going to be some challenges. So can we pause for a second and maybe have you think about the experiences that you've had and talk a little bit about the challenges that you face as you engaged with your local partner on these programs? And Sarah, I don't know if you want to start and then maybe followed by Bryce.
Sure. So I think what was interesting in our exchange between Nebraska and Doncel was that what we thought was going to be a challenge. So the group that traveled to Buenos Aires, none of us really spoke the language, and for many of us, it was our first time even traveling internationally. And so what we thought was going to be a challenge was actually the language. And what was really, really cool to see was that despite the language difference, particularly the young people, like I said, we traveled with some young people, they connected right away. And the language barrier was not a barrier at all. And I think what the takeaway for us in seeing that was that this idea of just human connection is universal and doesn't matter where you come from. We want to connect. We want to relate with people that have experiences similar to ours or that have a shared mission. And that just became so clear and right away. And I think it actually is one of the greatest impacts from our project was that human connection, particularly between the young people that, and someone else shared it earlier, but even though they're in different countries, their challenges and their successes are so similar. And so that wasn't a particular challenge, but it was actually something that we thought would not be a challenge. Yeah. That we thought would be a challenge.
Right. Yeah, that's fascinating. That's very, very interesting. Bryce, any point of view on this question you might want to share?
Sure. So I think your initial question, well, let me go to that one. I think there's, to what Sarah just said and you guys in Baltimore had just said prior to that, I think we had a similar experience. We had no one who knew how to speak Portuguese literally at all on our team. Very few folks had traveled or even traveled internationally. Some folks, there's first plane flight, things like that. So but we were able to quickly get through those things from the human connection side. I think the challenge for us in thinking about deeper adaptation is I wish we could bring all of our folks there all the time and continue to do that and have this exchange. And we'd love to bring the youth that we met in Brazil or a new group of youth up to see us in New Orleans. And we know that that's not really possible. So that has been both super helpful for us in the adaptation process, because I think having our team go there and participate, and then having Hedje staff come up to New Orleans and have that interaction has really created a buy-in across our team that makes the learning possible. And I think to the question of what's the value of the cross-border learning, I think it allowed that sort of shift, and it's kind of hard to describe, but the cultural differences and the almost creates an openness in a way that I think was different for us and was unique, and I think illuminated the value of the whole process in a way that I don't think I fully understood until we've participated in it. And I'd say, you know, thinking about the long term, I know that it's not always possible to do this, and we're thankful for this opportunity. The connections and the funding to make it happen were not something we had prior to this learning exchange. And I'd love to figure out ways, and we're already, of course, scheming to figure out ways to continue that and to create more of these opportunities. And I think, again, to the value of the cross-border learning, Hedje in Brazil is a huge organization. They train tens of thousands of youth, and we had never heard of them, certainly. So why would we have necessarily? We train youth in New Orleans. It's a totally different world. But IYF, having identified these international partners, was a huge value, and it really created an opening and an opportunity in a way that I don't think we realized the possibilities at first. We thought, oh, this will be great. We'll learn something. We'll have, you know, a cool exchange, and we'll just keep it moving. And then once we did that and actually were able to participate and understand a little deeper, we were able to make adaptations that we're implementing now. And I think I don't know the lessons about how to make it happen for the future, but it's really exciting to see this possibility arise. And of course, this is happening across 3 U.S. organizations now, thanks to this Reconnecting Youth partnership. But it's exciting and also challenging to think about how to duplicate that and make it wider.
Right. Good. So let's go a little bit deeper with each of you and some of the observations that you've had about your own specific work in this area. And I want to bring it back to Baltimore to you, Carrie. Given the work that you're doing, as I understand it, you've been able to hire a young peer facilitator to work with the students.
Right.
How do you think that this component, how is this critical to your work, and how much of the decision was influenced by, the value that you saw in that model as a result of your cross-border learning work? Talk a little bit about that.
Back when we first started, we did have the youth apprenticeship program for young people who were in our program, and we brought them through to become staff people. When this whole opportunity came up, it really threw up a flag. We really need to get back into raising our own, so to speak. We have a certain way of working with young people, and to have a young person come through that and be able to give knowledge and assistance to other young people in that same way that made them successful. That gives your program, that gives your curriculum a lot more credibility with young people.
Right.
The other thing is you're putting your money where your mouth is. So many times, people want peers to volunteer. Well, these are 18 to 24-year-olds. They have families, they have, other responsibilities. They need to be compensated, just like a job.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to expect them to be in a certain place, to do a certain thing, they need to be compensated. We have been able we piloted the Orale program last summer.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we used 2 peers. And it really, I mean, it really went well. Young people were engaged. They were excited. There was a lot of conversation back and forth with their peers. So when an opportunity came up to try to hire one of the peers, of course, the peer had to interview just like anybody else. But because of that work that they had that prior summer, they had a leg up because they had already interacted with their peers and shown that you know, they could conduct themselves. He ultimately could conduct himself in a manner which we knew would help other young people. So, you know, the peer-to-peer thing for me was something that really jumped out.
Good, thank you. Sarah, we've talked over the past year a lot about authentic youth engagement and some of the enabling factors that made it possible for Doncel to meaningfully support young people in Argentina. Could you address some of the contextual differences between Argentina and the US and talk a little bit about how that played into how you approached the program?
During our learning exchange, one thing that we noticed, and I spoke about this a little bit just previously, but one thing that we noticed was Doncel's ability to authentically connect was so powerful. And what we realized is that one of the reasons that that was so meaningful is that there's just very little bureaucracy that limits young people from forming those authentic, supportive relationships with one another in their country. And so this allows those young care leavers in Argentina to connect genuinely and support one another in a very natural sort of peer-to-peer capacity. For example, I actually have an example. One of the, I remember one of the e-guide members, and the e-guide is their sort of peer network for care leavers. One of the e-guide members was talking about how a younger care leaver that was living in a group home setting reached out because she was meeting with someone about a job and had no shoes. And the e-guide member actually went and got the care leaver, took her to find shoes, made sure she gets to the interview. And because of that, they became lifelong friends, and they still, I mean, it's still many years later, she reaches out. And I think on the contrary, sometimes in the United States, we tend to formalize those supportive relationships, whether that's a relationship between a paid practitioner or a direct care professional, and then young people that maybe are transitioning out of foster care. I think sometimes we even have a tendency to create roadblocks to that authentic connection. And, you know, I certainly understand why those restrictions are in place and why we have some of those restrictions. But I think what we learned from Doncel and the young people in Argentina is that when we encourage that natural connection, young people are actually really even more committed and invested in one another, and that ultimately results in really positive outcomes and creates this really natural peer support network, well beyond, I think, what we could ever pay a professional to do with young people. So that was something that was particularly meaningful, I think, in our work, and something that we've really tried to figure out how we can replicate within the confines of, you know, what we have in place in the United States, but how can we be better at encouraging that peer-to-peer support.
Yeah, and that kind of human, authentic, peer-to-peer dimension of this work is really important. I hear it in everything that all of you are talking about. It's connected, I think, Bryce, to the biocentric approach that you know, you believe so strongly in, and that you have used at YEP with youth. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about what what that means and what it means to apply a dimension of a biocentric approach to this work that we're doing in youth development. You want to tackle that?
Sure. And I think our interaction is a little different, is we don't have a peer-to-peer component in the same sense that I think Sarah was speaking about, and maybe the program in Baltimore as well. But I think the way that Youth Voice has been extremely valuable in our process is the sort of validation of its usefulness, and the idea that this can be taken to the next level, and in a place where maybe staff, and particularly executive staff, was just wary of whether this implementation was going to be useful. We were going to be able to find a way to adapt. And I think young people consistently said at each turn that there was value. And we saw that with our young people, and we also saw that when we presented in Aspen with a group of youth. Not only youth, it was any ages, but we saw that that was impactful there as well for the Aspen conference on Opportunity Youth. So over and over again, we've had young people say there's value when we weren't sure, and that has really kept us in the process. But to speak directly to the biocentric education model, it's definitely not something we were used to at all. As probably a lot of folks have experienced, we have tried to figure out ways to incorporate things like mindfulness, meditation, some, as Carrie said, some opportunities to slow down within the day into our program. And in Youth Empowerment Project, we've done that across programming for youth from 7 to 24 in our different programs. But in our job training program, which I run, we didn't really have that figured out yet. We've gotten pretty good at soft skills, how to shake hands, how to goal plan, how to write a resume and end up getting a job. And we've gotten pretty good at teaching the hard skills, whether it was to fix a bike or Photoshop and Illustrator. But what we couldn't figure out, or we were struggling to figure out, is how to impact that deeper change within people, within individuals, that allows them to sort of deal with the traumas or the histories that they're going through, which in reality are true for all of us, whether it's staff, young people, just everyone in life. And I think the exciting thing about the biocentric model, and just to say a little bit about it, it incorporates mindfulness, meditation. It's all centered around the circle. But it has a movement component as well. And Sheila from IYF has put up a good blog post that sort of describes some of the background material that I won't be able to get into in this conversation, but it incorporates psychology and philosophy and a lot of different study into a way that over the course of a curriculum, and we've adapted ours to 15 hours now in the beginning of our job training programming, it helps young people sort of center and find some space within their day to focus on themselves, and the idea that work and life are part of the same value, as they say in Brazil, work and life, one value, and the idea that you bring your whole self to work. So we can talk a little bit more about specifics if you want, but I don't think we have time to do too much of that here. But I'll tell you, we had this 15-hour curriculum that launched in January with a group of new students who had never been in our program before. And to this day, so we're 5 or 6 weeks out, they still meditate now at the beginning of every class for about 5 or 10 minutes.
That's fascinating. Yeah.
As simple as that may seem, the young people are so invested in it that it's really their choice. We've created a lot of space for them to say whether they want to do this, and this has been a choice that they've made.
Yeah, I love that you're ending on that note, and I wish we had more time to really talk about this, because I think this is critical and fundamental. It goes to authenticity. It goes to getting these young people to connect with, other dimensions of their personality that the traditional programming, I think, has not been able to offer them. But I do want to, I'm going to put my cynic hat on for 1 second, because I want you to address this, because you've seen some of the transformations that have occurred, and I want you to just talk a little, and this goes to all of you. When it goes to, let's just call it the biocentric approach right now, which is about mindfulness meditation, it's about all these other things that that these young people, that could really help them in very practical ways. What are the challenges in getting others in the field to embrace and understand the value of this dimension to the work? Can you talk a little bit about that? How could we bring this to life in order to really start to create some transformational change in the field? And I know that this was not a planned question, but so what? So can you guys just think a little bit about this? How do we start to do that?
I think it's about exposure. Exposing folks in this field of work to different ways of doing things. I think people in this field are highly, receptive to different ways to do things. However, it's providing the vehicle by which they are exposed. And I think this, for instance, this cross-border experience for us was able to give us that opportunity.
Right.
And it's usually positive when one site goes to another site.
Right.
To learn differences, because pretty much, as I stated earlier, the young people in Mexico were really no different than the young people here. They had developed a curriculum that worked. So why not expose our young people to it?
Right.
To get that same result.
Right, good. Anybody else want to get in on that question, Gina? Or
Go ahead, Gina.
No, I think that here in Baltimore, slowly but surely, I think staff and people in the youth services field, they're catching on to this, that, the student comes in through the door, or the young person comes in through the door with everything, with their whole being, their baggage included. So if all staff buys into this, I think it can work. I know I've seen it because I work in different schools in Baltimore.
Yeah.
I get to see different schools in action, kind of. And I've seen more yoga going on. I've seen more meditation that is school-wide. At least in one of the high schools here in Baltimore, I saw that they have meditation time for the whole school for whatever it is, 10 minutes or so, which is great. However, there has to be buy-in from all the staff, because
Right.
I've also seen it where there are teachers that don't enforce that time for meditation, and they just, even though in the loudspeaker says, okay, this is our meditation time, not all the teachers kind of participate. Yeah, some of them just let the students do something else, or they don't really use the time for meditation. So
Right,
I think as long the administration is on it, but if all the staff is not on it, it's not going to be as fruitful as it could be.
Understood. Bryce, you wanted to get in?
So I was just going to say, one thing that's a challenge for us, and I think we want to be mindful of as we move forward, is that the curriculum that we're looking at from Rede Cidadã in Brazil has years of history behind it, and a lot of research, data, cross-border learning prior to this. And I think we've figured out a way really Rede Cidadã has really helped us pilot this first round, but we don't want to just take sort of the surface level and try to bring that to a larger audience. What we're really working to now is to do the research and get the understanding within our own organization of a lot of the reasons behind this, the research, the years of work that were done prior to us starting to do this, so we can really bring that knowledge into our work. And we want to pay respect to the fidelity of this model. And of course, it's going to adapt to the US context and to the New Orleans context. But what we want to do is really honor the work that has been done. Also, because we know that is the only reason why this thing works. It's if you look at it from the outside, I think you wouldn't necessarily know where all these pieces that come together, why that folks are dancing in a circle to music and doing these kind of funny walks and things like that, and then sitting down in a circle and meditating for a minute and then discussing all these things. It doesn't, it might not make a lot of sense. So that's a challenge for us, is making sure that it's authentic and deep the way that we are adapting this model. And I just wanted to really quickly say one thing that's been funny and interesting, and I think the cross-border, the cross-cultural moment has allowed for, is I think in the US and particularly in New Orleans, we discussed a lot about the physical touch of youth to each other or between staff and youth. Obviously, there's a lot of risks there and a lot of things that we're concerned about to be mindful of, and we always will do that, but to the point where sometimes, you know, there's not a lot of hugging going on. And I think since this opportunity has happened, there's a lot more hugging that goes on at Youth Empowerment Project, which is kind of both, it's a little bit funny, but it's also actually meaningful. And that's been a beautiful part of the exchange.
Yeah, that's a very powerful comment, actually. And I understand how powerful I think touch can be. And even in a climate where obviously there've got to be boundaries and clearly defined boundaries, exploring how you you include and touch as part of a holistic approach to the work that you're doing, I think is a challenge, but potentially a very rewarding one to explore. We're going to turn it over to the audience for a second. I'm sure there are many, many questions, but before I do that, I just want to make sure that all of the panelists that I've had a pleasure to engage with this morning have had a chance to share a point of view. And I want to give them the last word if they'd like to share any last learnings that they feel they want to underscore as part of the experience that they've had. You may not, but I want to give you that privilege. No? Okay. Then with that, we're going to open it up. First of all, thank you all for being so engaged on this. It's really, I've learned a lot, and I'm sure that our audience has too. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to the audience for questions.
Go ahead, Bryce.
Sorry. So the question, you know, I'm not sure if it's possible to have learned the same things within the U.S. context, and I wonder about that myself. It's been a great experience, as we pointed out, certainly on just a cultural level and an experience of our staff and young people to be able to travel to Brazil, to have this cross-border exchange. Is it possible? I hope it's possible, because actually we want to bring this hopefully to the U.S., you know, through Youth Empowerment Project if possible, or help facilitate it, or through Rede Cidadã, meeting with other organizations, however that is possible. I think for us, we have looked in the US context for opportunities like this, and certainly have tried to, in small doses, which is how we started with this learning exchange as well, find things that were meaningful, find ways to sort of adapt and improve our job training program, and ultimately all of our programming to be, to create deeper change within young people, or create opportunities for young people to change themselves. And we hadn't found a way prior to this. So I'm not sure. Is it possible? Yes, I think if the opportunity exists, it is. And again, like I said, we would love to help make that happen within the US context. But for us, the learning exchange created an opportunity for that change to happen. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I think that's how it worked for Youth Empowerment Project.
Well, I would just add to that too, Bryce, that for Nebraska, absolutely, the answer is yes, we can learn from other U.S. programs, and we do. We have lots of wonderful partners across the country that have provided technical assistance and support and ideas and engagement, and it's fantastic. I think what is unique about the cross-border learning is that we found that the folks in Buenos Aires have unique challenges, so challenges that maybe we don't have in the United States or in Nebraska, but that also then means they have unique solutions to those challenges that we've been able to look at adapting for Nebraska or for the United States. So I think the answer is yes, and. I mean, I think we certainly can learn from one another in the United States, and then also broaden our scope and our creativity and our innovation by looking at what is happening across borders as well. So it looks like, I don't know if the folks from International Youth Foundation, maybe they lost connection, but it looks like Kat has a question. Curious to hear how the international partners were selected and paired with U.S. programs. And I would defer to IYF for that one if they're connected.
Yeah, Sarah and Bryce, I'll just step in. This is Jessie from the International Youth Foundation. It looks like they had a little glitch with the tech in the Baltimore office. So I think we've lost the panelists that are there for the moment. I know it looks like they're trying to work it out. But right now we just have you two for answering questions, which is awesome.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jamil Alexander. I actually work for the Aspen Institute Forum for Community Solutions that Bryce is speaking about. And much respect, Bryce, and even Thaddeus being on this and asking the question. So there has been a Reconnecting Youth campaign that the Opportunity Network actually brings together. Comes across cross-sector collaborations, and at the top of this hour in this webinar, it was mentioned as far as, just kind of busting those silos. And I was trying to see if there's any intentionality, whether it be here in the U.S. and as even we go global with the forum, as far as connecting. I guess this is kind of going back to the question earlier, but whether it be Thaddeus, Bryce, or Sarah, has there been any thought around just kind of sharing some of these best practices within the Opportunity Youth Network, or even within us kind of launching the Global Opportunity Youth at the forum? Just some thoughts around that, or how you would like to collaborate, or how can we collaborate?
Yeah, well, I can say specifically on that, and thank you for that question. Let's do it, basically, is how I feel. I think what process we're in right now, we had is a build and growth process, because my thing was, let's bring this immediately to everybody, right? And then once we kind of bought in, which I will say, like I mentioned earlier, took us some time. It took us over a year, a little more than that even, to really say, like, yeah, this is cool, we like this, but we hadn't committed to it yet, I think, in a deeper process. And once we decided to do that, and I think, as I mentioned, the session that we had in Aspen for the Opportunity Youth Gathering was actually a transformative moment in my mind, because I had seen our young people and staff participate and be moved. I'd seen folks in Brazil participate and be moved, but I still wasn't really sure that it was going to be able to be translated larger. And when we were in Aspen and we had youth from all over the country, and I say youth, it was young folks, it was probably 20s to 40s or 50s folks who were in that room, and there was a transformation then. That's when I was like, okay, let's bring this everywhere. But what we decided to do, and I think is hopefully the right approach, and let's continue this conversation, is we decided to build it at home and make sure that we understood what we were doing before we tried to take it larger, because we know we can't bring hundreds of people back and forth to Brazil constantly. So that's the process we're in right now. So I would hope, and obviously there's a funding aspect of this and whatever, but I would hope we can invite folks from all over the country to New Orleans or present at other opportunities like this in the future, and then start piloting elsewhere. And I think folks in your communities, wherever you are, if you want to do that, at least for us, we are totally open to that. I would just say we want to make sure we've built it first, and we make sure that we understand it first, so we're not bringing something halfway.
And can folks hear us? I think we're back up and running.
You're back.
Excellent,
Great,
excellent. So glad. Thank you so much to everybody for keeping the conversation going while we dealt with technology.
I also think, Carrie, you wanted to make a point.
Yeah, we were talking about the youth voice, ensuring that young people have a voice in programming. A couple things come to mind: a youth management team. Whenever there are decisions that that need to be made and young people can be brought in, it's excellent. One of the things that we've also done is for our literacy instructors, when we've hired new literacy instructors, of course, we interview them. However, the next step is to do a presentation to a group of students. And we give the students an evaluation sheet, and the students actually evaluate that instructor. And in most cases, we go with the students' input, because they're the ones who, interesting, are going to be directly impacted with that person.
Right.
Can I jump in just to sort of respond to Jamil's question too, and to sort of jump off of what Bryce was saying, and I think maybe getting back to Nelson's earlier question around, how do we convince folks, or how do we really talk about why this is so meaningful, and moving beyond looking, I mean, employment outcomes are so important and education outcomes are so important, and that is the ultimate end goal of every one of these organizations that we've been working with, is how do we make sure that young people are fully prepared for the next step in life and in work and whatever that might be. So much of what we're talking about is sort of this, the deep self-work that happens. And quite honestly, I have heard multiple times say, well, where's the evidence? And what does that mean? And really, we want to talk about emotional intelligence and we want to talk about resiliency, but we don't always want to fund that. And I think, you know, one of the things that's really interesting, and you know, our hypothesis when we started this was that there was value to cross-border learning, and that it was really powerful from shifting mindsets and really exposing practitioners to different ways of working to solve similar challenges and similar problems. And I think what's been really exciting is that our hypothesis from what we've seen has been true. There's value. We've heard you say that on the line, and I think that we've continued to experience that. And I think to Bryce's point, the next step is, you know, how do we create opportunities for meaningful demonstration projects so that we can create space for practitioners in the US to pilot some of these new things that have promise, but maybe don't have the evidence. And I think that's a challenge for policymakers. I think it's a challenge for practitioners. And quite honestly, I think it's a challenge for the funders that are funding this type of work, because we want to fund innovation, but we're so focused. And I think sometimes what's needed on the ground and sort of what that looks like and sort of what funders are interested in and what employers are interested in, there can be a disconnect. And I think that this is an interesting way to create some cross-pollination and hopefully spur some new ideas and innovation in a really thoughtful and meaningful way.
Yeah, absolutely. We have time for a few more questions. Any other questions from the audience?
Shannon, this is Sarah, and I just wanted to, there was a question from Kat earlier that we weren't able to fully answer, so I just want to make sure that you see that one up towards the top, about how the international partners were selected and paired with the U.S. program.
It's a great question. So the way that we did that this sort of for phase one of this work was we, through a pretty a fast and furious U.S. research scan, were able to identify some U.S.-based organizations that had responded to some of the surveys that we had put out, and we invited them to be learning partners with us in this journey. We sort of asked a series of questions of them to gauge their readiness and interest in learning, to ask them to sort of focus on the challenges that they were seeing in their work, the focus points that they were working on. And from there, we had done some documentation of promising practices from Latin America, primarily Latin America. And we looked at kind of the practices that we had documented and some of the other organizations that we had identified for documentation, if they had sort of a promising approach. And we made a pairing based on the needs identified by the U.S. organizations as they related to sort of our broader identified focal points. So they needed to be focused on uplifting youth voice and looking at young people from an asset-based approach. It needed to be focusing on employer engagement and sort of challenges around there. Challenges of how do you identify and recruit opportunity young people, and then how do you make sure that they stay in your programs. And then we looked at what we were calling at the time was sort of social and emotional learning and integrating that into employability programs, but I think that became a much more comprehensive piece as we went through. And we started with sort of a preliminary conversation where we brought both of the organizations together. And, you know, from there, if it seemed like a good fit, we developed a pretty solid learning agenda that was, you know, had parameters around it. But it was an iterative process, and it often came to be that where we started with the learning agenda would evolve throughout the relationship and throughout the process. But that process was somewhat, we had a methodology behind it, but it was, we were sort of given time constraints needed to identify those partners in a little bit of a more hasty, sort of speedy way. And so we were thoughtful about how we did that.
Great. Anyone else?
Oh, we have one question from online from Ben Lewis. He says, I'm really interested in other organizations and resources focused on supporting the unique challenges facing rural opportunity youth, specifically in North America.
Excellent. Certainly we can work to connect you. So we can follow up, and please, I'll put up how you can contact us on the last slide. I don't know if that's up, actually. I can't. Not up. We'll make sure that we get you that information. And actually, we're doing some work. International Youth Foundation, separate from Reconnecting Youth, has just started to do some work in some rural communities in Texas and Louisiana, and we can share some of our preliminary learnings around that as well.
Good. Any other questions? Okay, let me just sort of then end with a couple of recurring themes before I turn it back to Shannon. And by the way, I'm assuming that materials, et cetera, that have been referred to during this conversation, that IYF will make them readily available on the web. You all mentioned, I think, a blog that you found extremely interesting. We'll make sure that all of that information is available for the participants. So I just want to thank our panelists, because clearly they have been involved in some very interesting, innovative work as a result of and with the engagement of IYF. And there are a couple of things that struck me as evergreen themes. One is the integration of the youth voice as you move forward with a lot of these programs. I think respectability, credibility, but also a certain ownership involving them. They have a sense of what works, what doesn't work, and somehow finding a way to channel their points of view as you create these programs and implement these programs is critical. Two is, and I was fascinated by Bryce's exploration of and work with biocentric education. And this is a particularly interesting one, I think, because I think all of the panelists embrace and understand the importance of this dimension to the work in youth development. But there's still a lot of challenges out there. Does it work? How do we know it works? How do you do it right? What can we learn about what is really working, and how can we adapt and scale it up in efficient ways, and in ways that frankly make sense for our funders to support? And I think that's a challenge. Three, I think Gina talked very nicely about the work in adaptation. And you actually started off saying something about the kind of person that we now have to really work with, and the cultural differences that we have to really address. And perhaps there's no better way, more effective way of doing that than to really have cross-cultural conversations that allow us to adapt these programs, even for implementation and delivery in the US. So it's this idea that the US doesn't have the answers to absolutely every question, and that when it comes to cross-border learning, when it comes to adaptation, there's a lot to be gained. Fourth was this fascinating observation by Sarah that in spite of the language differences, that that's really wasn't really a huge challenge, and that what we find as we implemented some of these programs was the value of the human connection and getting these individuals to connect in an authentic and profound way to one another and to their trainers. And if you did that, then what you think about as potential challenges like language and cultural differences, they seem to sort of melt away, or they take a secondary, tertiary role. I think there was an expression of desire to be able to, in an ideal sense, and this goes to scalability, being able to do this, being able to bring people together cross-border much more frequently, or at least to explore how we can get those benefits without incurring the costs, quite frankly. How do we replicate that idea in a much more efficient way? We talked about that in some cases, and I think this was you, Sarah, talking about Doncel in Argentina, that bureaucracy is an issue. I mean, certainly we here in the United States are operating within very strict, carefully defined bureaucracies. We just have to operate within them. and the extent to which we can do away with some of that, it certainly makes program implementation easier. And then we talked about, I think, the need to raise awareness about what's working and what doesn't much more effectively, and try to get, whether it's a program staff to buy into some of these approaches, or in the case of funders and the youth development community in general, more understanding about the investments that need to be made in areas that clearly are working, even if they're now in a scaled down version. But there's clearly stuff that's working, that's new, that's interesting, that has allowed us to learn about tailoring our programs and our approaches in a much more effective way. Is there anything else, any other observations you might want to share? Okay, then I'm going to turn it back over to Shannon.
So I just want to thank everybody, the audience in the room, our fearless moderator, Nelson, for joining us, and to all of the panelists, Sarah, Bryce, Carrie, Gina, and everybody else at your respective organizations that have been involved in this very exciting, learning journey over the last, 3 years. I think we at IYF have been so grateful to lead the charge on this initiative, and it's been such a pleasure to work with such diverse, robust, impactful organizations working in different spheres with young people, and to align some of those passion points with our passion for young people and with the passion that other organizations across the globe have for young people. I think it's been really incredible to make those connections. As we have mentioned and shared, this amazing Hedge post that Bryce referenced that Sheila has written is not yet live, but it will be live by Wednesday at the latest. And I will certainly share the link to that when we send follow-up notes. If you're interested in learning anything else about IYF or the Reconnecting Youth Initiative, you can check out IYFreconnectingyouth.org. I will confess that there are a couple of glitches on the website right now in adding to our tech challenges of the morning. Those will be resolved, hopefully before the end of the day. Certainly feel free to reach out to me with any questions. My email address is up on the screen, or should be. And we look forward to hopefully being able to continue this work moving forward. And thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.